Welcome to Forbidden Fathoms. Picture this: an enigmatic stone quarry nestled within China's landscape, where prehistoric craftsmen sculpted humanity's most massive stone megaliths destined for an immense construction endeavor, only to abandon these giants before their intended function could materialize. Visualize a complete metropolis concealed underground, featuring passageways and vaults extensive enough to house countless thousands of inhabitants. Consider a collection of gigantic bronze facial coverings so intricate and supernatural in their craftsmanship that they appear connected to a civilization completely separate from any archaeological findings we've encountered. Throughout our planet, archaeological revelations exist that transcend mere impressiveness. They're genuinely perplexing. Certain discoveries possess such magnitude, such meticulous construction, or such peculiar characteristics that they appear to surpass the technological abilities of the societies historians believe created them. Nevertheless, their existence is undeniable. These aren't legendary tales or folklore transmitted across generations, but tangible, quantifiable locations and relics that can be witnessed, handled, and investigated. Scientists have documented, captured imagery of, and analyzed these wonders throughout multiple decades, yet frequently, conventional interpretations prove inadequate. Throughout this presentation, Forbidden Fathoms examines 8 such enigmas, spanning primordial megalithic formations to extraterrestrial, resembling sculptures, from circular stone arrangements detectable solely from aerial perspectives to complete ancestral burial grounds currently submerged underwater. We'll investigate each revelation's contents, the chronological background of every finding, the magnitude and sophistication of labor required, and the reasons why, despite contemporary scientific instruments and extensive investigation spanning decades, countless mysteries persist without resolution. Certain locations might leave viewers questioning their construction methodology entirely. Alternative sites could evoke imagination regarding the existence of their creators, laboring with implements and understanding that theoretically shouldn't have sufficed to produce what remains visible presently. Therefore, whether your interest lies in historical narrative, architectural achievements, or persistent unexplained phenomena, prepare yourselves. Forbidden Fathoms now ventures into remarkably astonishing archaeological findings that defy complete comprehension. Departing from expansive desert terrains where enormous circular formations extend throughout the terrain, our journey transitions toward an entirely contrasting environment hidden below the tranquil waters of a freshwater basin located in Israel's northern territory. Within this location, underwater acoustic scanning technology has uncovered something colossal and entirely unanticipated: an immense rock construction resting in complete quietude along the floor of the Galilee Sea. During 2003, researchers performing an acoustic mapping expedition of the Galilee Sea, alternatively identified as Kinneret Lake, identified an irregular formation upon the aquatic floor. Their equipment displayed a substantial cone, configured mass emerging from the underwater sediment, approximately 9 meters in vertical measurement. Initially, observers might have categorized this as an ordinary geological rock structure, yet its uniform configuration implied human construction. Following deployment of underwater explorers to examine the discovery, They encountered a meticulously assembled monument constructed exclusively from sizable basalt rock pieces. The arrangement was undeniably purposeful, featuring stones positioned in patterns that natural geological processes wouldn't generate. This revelation proved extraordinary, considering both its dimensional proportions and its geographical placement, entirely immersed within an environment where comparable architectural achievements remain unknown. Its existence along the aquatic floor instantaneously generated inquiries: which civilization constructed this monument? What function was it designed to fulfill? And most captivating of all, has it always existed beneath the water's surface? The monument represents a colossal cairn, a pile of rocks fabricated from indigenous basalt boulders, numerous specimens weighing multiple hundreds of kilograms individually. These geological materials were accumulated to create a conical shape measuring roughly 32 feet in vertical dimension, while spanning nearly 230 feet across its foundational diameter. Scientific investigators calculate the cairn encompasses approximately 230,000 cubic feet of stone material, possessing a collective mass of roughly 60,000 tons. For comparative perspective, this surpasses the weight of numerous contemporary maritime vessels. The rocks seemingly were positioned without binding mortar, depending upon gravitational force and meticulous arrangement to maintain the monument's structural integrity. The cairn occupies comparatively deep waters relative to the lake's dimensions. Although underwater visibility frequently remains inadequate, diving explorers have observed that its inclines are precipitous and uniform, indicating intentional architectural design. The configuration resembles substantial stone burial structures or ritualistic cairns discovered terrestrially across diverse prehistoric societies, though nothing approaching this magnitude has been recorded submerged within this geographical region. Establishing the cairn's chronological age presents considerable difficulty, as aquatic conditions and sedimentary deposits have obscured it throughout multiple centuries. Nevertheless, scientific researchers theorize it potentially originates from the Bronze Age period, approximately 4,000 years historically, founded upon analytical comparisons with analogous stone monuments discovered on terrestrial surfaces. Should this chronological assessment prove accurate, the structure could precede the lake's contemporary water boundaries. Throughout antiquity, aquatic levels may have resided considerably lower, signifying the cairn was initially erected upon arid terrain or within wetland territory adjacent to the shoreline. Gradually ascending waters throughout successive centuries could have progressively submerged the monument. Regarding its intended function, multiple hypotheses exist. The structure may have constituted a funerary mound erected to commemorate a prominent individual within the population. Alternatively, it could have operated as a ceremonial location, a destination for spiritual practices or communal assemblies for inhabitants residing proximally. Another plausible explanation suggests it functioned as a navigational reference point or maritime harbor indicator, directing watercraft along the lake's perimeter. Absent archaeological artifacts or textual inscriptions, these hypotheses remain entirely conjectural. However, the labor investment required for constructing such a monument indicates it possessed tremendous significance to its builders. Relocating and positioning 60,000 tons of basalt material, without contemporary mechanical equipment, would have demanded extraordinary organizational coordination and workforce participation. The constructors would have required quarrying operations for the stones, transportation logistics to the construction location, and precise stacking procedures to achieve the cairn's steep, sided conical configuration. Assuming terrestrial construction sledges, cylindrical rollers, or rudimentary floating platforms could have facilitated stone movement from nearby geological sources. The mortar's absence indicates the monument's structural stability relied completely upon careful positioning, necessitating both technical expertise and practical experience. The cairn's magnitude implies synchronized communal endeavor, potentially extending across numerous years. It additionally suggests the architects possessed compelling motivation to dedicate substantial labor toward a project offering neither residential shelter nor nutritional provisions. Regardless of its purpose, it must have carried substantial symbolic or utilitarian significance to warrant the undertaking. The paramount question concerns whether the cairn was constructed within aquatic conditions or upon terrestrial ground. If historical water levels resided lower, the monument could have occupied a shoreline or elevated position, only becoming submerged subsequently due to natural fluctuations in the lake's depth. If construction occurred underwater, that would suggest an even more remarkable degree of technical capability and resolve for a Bronze Age civilization. Equally enigmatic remains its cultural framework. No comparable submerged monuments are documented within the Galilee Sea's boundaries, and without archaeological materials or human remains, connecting it to any particular population group remains currently impossible. Until additional evidence emerges, either through excavation operations or advanced technological investigation, the cairn will persist as among the most fascinating underwater revelations within the territory, prompting the question, did its architects witness the lake as it appears presently? Or was their surrounding environment completely transformed? Transitioning from the concealed underground passages of Derinkuyu, our exploration advances eastward toward a distinctly different variety of enigma, one not excavated into geological formations, but extracted from earthen depths in remnants of precious gold, valuable jade, and metallic bronze. Where Derinkuyu's mystique resided in its enormous subterranean dimensions, this subsequent revelation's astonishment originated from its creative workmanship. Relics so peculiar and unrecognizable that they appear to represent an entirely independent segment of humanity's chronological narrative. The Chronicle of Sangsingdui commences in 1929, when an agricultural worker in Sichuan province, China, was excavating an irrigation channel and accidentally discovered a collection of jade fragments. During that period, the finding was acknowledged but never comprehensively examined, and the location remained largely abandoned throughout multiple decades. The situation changed during the 1980s when extensive archaeological excavations initiated, exposing two colossal sacrificial burial chambers containing thousands of historical objects. These relics immediately captured the focus of archaeological specialists, not merely due to their numerical quantity, but attributed to their distinctive aesthetic. They bore no resemblance to the artifacts belonging to any recognized Chinese cultural tradition. Bronze facial coverings displaying exaggerated characteristics, towering humanoid sculptures, golden decorative pieces, jade-cutting implements, and peculiar zoomorphic configurations emerged from the terrestrial layers, each specimen more remarkable than its predecessor. The revelation indicated the presence of a sophisticated, previously undocumented Bronze Age society, which would subsequently be designated as Sangsingdui. The relics of Sangsingdui are incomparable to anything discovered within Chinese archaeological investigations. Distinguished among these discoveries are the gigantic bronze facial masks, certain specimens featuring countenances exceeding 1 meter in width. Numerous examples showcase expansive, fixated ocular organs that extend outward in cylindrical or narrow apertures, as though designed to monitor the realm beyond their immediate vicinity. Additional specimens possess sharply articulated nasal structures, substantial auditory appendages, and stylized oral cavities, all executed in prominent geometric configurations. Equally remarkable are the bronze figurative sculptures, incorporating a statue surpassing 2 meters in vertical measurement, theorized to have grasped an ivory article now vanished throughout temporal passage. Goldsmithing from the archaeological location includes elaborate foil facial coverings and ornamental sections, whereas jade relics span from ritualistic cutting tools to sculpted zoological representations. One exceptionally renowned artifact is the bronze arboreal sculpture measuring nearly 4 meters in height, featuring coiling limbs and intricate foliage elements astounding in both dimensional scale and manufacturing excellence. The degree of metallurgical expertise demonstrated here was remarkably advanced. The bronze objects were formed in separate components and subsequently assembled together with outstanding exactitude. What proves particularly striking is the profound difference this aesthetic presents from that of the concurrent Shang dynasty governing central China. Whereas Shang bronze works frequently display condensed, balanced compositions and Taoidi mask imagery, Sangsingdu's creations are expansive, conceptual, and almost dreamlike in character. The two cultural entities clearly evolved along vastly different artistic and emblematic trajectories. Most academic researchers theorize Sangsingdui constituted a segment of the historical Shu kingdom, which prospered in the Sichuan Basin region approximately 3,000 years historically. This geographical territory was physically isolated from the Yellow River civilizations by mountainous ranges and waterways, which potentially explains its unique cultural evolution. Despite its sophistication, Sangsingdui abandoned no textual documentation, at minimum none currently discovered. Substantial portions of our understanding derive from the artifacts themselves and the structural arrangement of the archaeological location. Archaeological evidence indicates a multifaceted society possessing talented artisans, spiritual or ceremonial authorities, and extensive commercial networks. Materials including ivory, oceanic shells, and particular mineral stones discovered at Sangsingdui indicate exchanges with geographically distant territories. At some chronological juncture, the settlement and its cultural framework appear to have been deserted. The underlying causes remain uncertain. Environmental transformation, material resource exhaustion, aquatic flooding, or military confrontation all represent plausible explanations. Regardless of the catalyst, Sangsingdui vanished from historical documentation, abandoning exclusively its remarkable artifacts as testimony of its former existence. The exceptional nature of Sangsingdui's artistic expression constitutes its greatest conundrum. The substantial protruding ocular features on numerous masks and statues are dissimilar to any alternative decorative pattern in Chinese antiquity. Did they portray deities, ancestral spirits, or legendary entities? Certain academic authorities theorize they symbolize an emphasis on visual perception as a metaphysical principle, whereas alternative scholars propose they're connected to regional folklore concerning divine monarchs. What renders it increasingly perplexing is the deficiency of explicit connections to contemporary cultures of that historical period. The Shang dynasty, which was experiencing its zenith during Sangsingdui's flourishing, distributed certain technological innovations but not artistic methodology or symbolic representation. This has prompted some to contemplate whether Sangsingdui developed almost completely in geographic seclusion, or whether it maintained influences from an even more ancient forgotten civilization. There additionally exists the inquiry of why numerous valuable objects ultimately became interred in sacrificial burial chambers. Did they constitute offerings to supernatural entities, emblems commemorating the conclusion of the settlement's vitality? Or was the interment component of an orchestrated ceremony connected to the culture's disappearance? To this contemporary day, Sangsingdu persists as one of the most mysterious Bronze Age revelations globally. Its artifacts compel historians to reconsider the heterogeneity of early Chinese civilizations, and perhaps most intriguingly, they abandon us with an inquiry: was Sangsingdui genuinely isolated, or merely one surviving fragment of a substantially larger enigma that awaits future discovery? Departing from colossal, immobile stone blocks abandoned within a Chinese quarrying location, our journey now transitions toward a vastly different category of monumental architecture, one you'll never discover towering above the terrain. Actually, you won't observe it whatsoever unless you possess knowledge of precisely where to search. The reason being, this forthcoming marvel was constructed in inverted fashion. Rather than extending toward the celestial heights, its architects excavated profoundly into terrestrial depths, fabricating a complete metropolis concealed beneath the surface. During 1963, a resident in Cappadocia, Turkey, was undertaking basement restoration when he penetrated through a structural barrier and encountered something unanticipated: a passageway extending into a chamber excavated directly from solid rock. As he conducted exploration, additional chambers materialized, interconnected by slender corridors. This wasn't a modest cavern or warehousing area. It constituted the gateway to an immense subterranean metropolis. The settlement is presently recognized as Derinkuyu, and it represents one of the most extensive and profound underground habitations ever uncovered. It descends approximately 60 meters beneath ground level and is distributed throughout multiple stratified tiers. These tiers are linked by precipitous staircases and serpentine walkways, some sufficiently broad for clusters of individuals. Alternative passages so constricted you'd need to advance in single-file formation. The geological material in Cappadocia is volcanic tuff, pliable enough to excavate, yet structurally sound when properly reinforced. Inhabitants in this geographical territory have been hollowing residential dwellings and warehousing chambers into the rock throughout thousands of years. However, Derinkuyu exists on an altogether different magnitude. Its dimensional proportions and architectural sophistication distinguish it as something vastly exceeding a conventional protective shelter. As archaeological specialists explored Derinkuyu, they discovered it was engineered to sustain a population for extended temporal durations. Culinary facilities possessed darkened overhead surfaces from countless centuries of combustion fires. Warehousing chambers designated for grain, oil, and fermented beverages lined the passageways. There existed expansive communal gathering spaces, smaller family-proportioned quarters, and even areas that resembled educational facilities or assembly chambers. The settlement's atmospheric circulation infrastructure is among its most remarkable characteristics. More than 50 ventilation channels transported fresh atmospheric air downward through the different stratified levels, maintaining the lower chambers with breathable oxygen. Several channels additionally operated as water wells, signifying inhabitants could obtain aquatic resources without ascending to the surface level. Domesticated creatures had their designated location here, too. Animal enclosures were hollowed into the rock on elevated tiers so livestock could be transferred inward easily. Colossal circular stone barriers measuring up to 1 meter in width could be rotated into position to hermetically seal sections, safeguarding people from hostile intruders. Spiritual spaces were also incorporated into the architectural arrangement. Archaeological specialists have identified worship chapels and devotional chambers, demonstrating that existence underground wasn't exclusively about physical survival. It possessed a communal and metaphysical dimension as well. With adequate spatial capacity for as many as 20,000 individuals and their domesticated animals, the settlement necessitated meticulous organizational planning for nutritional warehousing, refuse elimination, and general systematic order. It wasn't a provisional hiding location. It was a destination designed to operate like a genuine metropolis, just obscured from external observation. Cappadocia has been inhabited by numerous civilizations throughout thousands of years, incorporating the Hittites, Phrygians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Seljuks, and Ottomans. Its geographical position on significant commercial routes generated prosperity and cultural interaction, but simultaneously rendered it a vulnerable target for military invasion. The precise historical origins of Derinkuyu remain ambiguous. Certain researchers theorize the initial stratified levels could have been excavated by the Phrygians in the 8th or 7th century BCE. Alternative scholars propose the Hittites may have initiated it more than 1,000 years previously. Throughout temporal progression, subsequent civilizations augmented and enhanced it. By the Byzantine historical period, Derinkuyu was definitively operational. Historical documentation and archaeological testimony suggest it furnished protection for early Christians escaping religious persecution and subsequently for populations concealing themselves from Arab military incursions. While defensive protection is the most prevalent explanation, there are alternative possibilities. The consistent underground temperature rendered it optimal for preserving nutritional supplies and fermented beverages year-round. It may have been utilized seasonally or as a fortified way station for commercial traders transporting merchandise along the Silk Road. Certain archaeological specialists theorize Derinkuyu might have been interconnected by tunneling passages to alternative subterranean settlements, generating a networked system for secure transportation, commerce, and information transmission. Constructing an underground metropolis like Derinkuyu would have constituted an enormous undertaking. Even with the comparatively malleable volcanic rock, the absolute magnitude of stone material that required removal is staggering. Everything excavated outward had to be transported to the surface without contemporary mechanical equipment. Illumination was another complication. Laborers depended on oil-burning lamps, and managing combustion smoke in an enclosed environment demanded a meticulously orchestrated ventilation infrastructure from the very beginning. The architects had to comprehend how to position channels so atmospheric circulation would flow appropriately through all the stratified tiers. The architectural blueprint also had to prevent structural collapse. Overhead surfaces and vertical barriers were configured to distribute gravitational weight uniformly and load. Supporting columns were preserved in strategic locations. Certain portions of the settlement are noticeably coarser and more constricted, probably the most ancient sections, whereas alternative areas are smoother and more capacious, displaying enhancements across generational periods. These details indicate the settlement wasn't fabricated all simultaneously. It expanded across centuries as each successive population adapted it to their requirements. Most authorities concur that Derinkuyu's principal function was to safeguard inhabitants during hazardous periods. Its concealed entryways, protective stone barriers, and self-sustaining capabilities indicate a design concentrated on survival during military sieges or hostile raids. However, the dimensional magnitude raises more substantial inquiries. Why was it engineered sufficiently large for tens of thousands of individuals? Was surface-level existence so perilous that complete communities needed to inhabit underground locations for months? Or did it fulfill multiple functions, combining defensive protection with commercial activity, warehousing operations, and seasonal habitation? What's indisputable is that Derinkuyu wasn't singular. More than 200 subterranean settlements have been located in Cappadocia, and certain specimens show indications they could be interconnected by lengthy tunneling passages. If that's accurate, there might have formerly existed a complete concealed network extending beneath the geographical territory. Who initially envisioned excavating a settlement of this magnitude under terrestrial ground? And what was transpiring above the surface that rendered it worthwhile for the incredible labor investment to construct? Those inquiries still establish Derinkuyu as one of the most captivating archaeological revelations globally. Derinkuyu is not isolated. Cappadocia is scattered with dozens of smaller underground complexes, certain specimens linked by tunnels extending for kilometers. This suggests a broader networked system, a subterranean culture functioning on a dimensional scale that still isn't completely comprehended. Standing in its silent chambers presently, you can't resist wondering who first conceived this settlement beneath the rock, and what was the surface world resembling that motivated them to select inhabiting so distantly from solar illumination. Transitioning from the elaborate bronze facial coverings of Sangsingdui, our exploration advances westward toward the arid landscapes of Jordan and Syria, where another variety of enigma extends throughout the territory, not manifested in precious gold or valuable jade, but in geological stone, arranged across a dimensional scale you can exclusively truly comprehend from aerial elevation. The enormous circular formations initially appeared in the archaeological documentation during the 1920s when British Royal Air Force aviators conducting flights over the arid regions of Jordan and Syria observed a sequence of colossal, flawlessly circular configurations upon the terrestrial surface. From elevated positions, they emerged immediately with geometric patterns inscribed into an otherwise jagged and asymmetrical terrain. Upon ground level, nevertheless, they were considerably easier to disregard, fabricated from modest stone barriers blending into the surrounding environment. They could readily be confused for natural geological rock formations. Initial expeditions documented a quantity of these circular structures, but with restricted resources and alternative priorities, they obtained only cursory consideration throughout decades. The situation remained unchanged until contemporary satellite photographic technology became extensively accessible in the 21st century, when enthusiasm intensified again. Digital instrumentation permitted researchers to identify dozens of circular formations with exceptional precision, exposing just how uniform their measurements were throughout different geographical locations. Presently, we possess knowledge of at minimum a dozen substantial specimens in Jordan and numerous examples in Syria. Even with high-definition photographic imagery, though, the circular formations remain cryptic. No textual inscriptions, evident cultural indicators, or connected architectural structures have been discovered that can conclusively clarify their historical origins or operational function. The enormous circular formations fluctuate marginally in dimensional proportions, but calculate approximately 400 meters in diameter, roughly equivalent to the longitudinal measurement of 4 athletic football fields positioned consecutively end to end. Their barrier walls are fabricated from indigenous stone accumulated together without binding mortar and measure only approximately 1 meter in vertical height. The dimensional thickness of the barriers fluctuates, but they are characteristically too modest to operate as effective obstacles for human beings or domesticated animals. Perhaps the most remarkable characteristic is their exactitude. Numerous circular formations are almost flawlessly round with deviations from a genuine circular shape quantified in just a few centimeters despite their colossal dimensional proportions. This degree of precision would be demanding even with contemporary surveying instruments, much less with whatever methodologies were accessible to their architects. Intriguingly, none of the circular formations possess distinct openings or gateway entrances. If they formerly existed, they may have deteriorated or been concealed throughout temporal passage. Their geographical placement is also peculiar. Most are located in exposed flat territories with no evident correlation to waterways, commercial routes, or settlements that we possess knowledge of. Establishing chronological age for the circular formations is challenging because they lack biological material for radiocarbon analytical testing. Certain archaeological specialists propose they may be at minimum 2,000 years historically, but alternative researchers theorize they could originate much farther back, potentially into the prehistoric temporal period. The arid landscapes of Jordan and Syria are abundant in historical structures from Roman transportation roads and military fortifications to prehistoric cairns and stone geometric alignments. These territories have been inhabited by nomadic pastoral herders, established agricultural farmers, and commercial trading populations throughout thousands of years, each population abandoning their impression on the terrain. Alternative large dimensional stonework constructions in the geographical territory, frequently designated desert kites, are recognized to have been utilized for hunting or corralling domesticated animals. However, the enormous circular formations don't correspond to this behavioral pattern. They are excessively exposed, excessively modest in height, and deficient in the funnel-shaped entrances characteristic of kites. Certain archaeological specialists have observed that smaller stone circular formations and geoglyphs in the Middle Eastern region occasionally designate burial locations or ceremonial territories, but nothing interior to the enormous circular formations indicates such a function. The deficiency of artifacts, implements, pottery fragments, skeletal bones renders it challenging to connect them to any particular culture or chronological period with certainty. One of the most straightforward hypotheses is that the enormous circular formations were territorial boundary indicators, monumental perimeter outlines, signifying the geographical extent of tribal domain, sacred spatial area, or seasonal pastoral grazing privileges. Substantial visible configurations in the terrain could have operated as a visual communication signal to adjacent populations. Another plausibility is that they possess ceremonial or ritualistic functions. A 400-meter-wide enclosed spatial area could have accommodated seasonal assemblies, religious processions, or open atmosphere rituals. The deficiency of permanent architectural structures internally might correspond with the conceptualization of temporary occasions, where populations congregated only at particular temporal periods annually. A limited number of researchers have suggested the speculation that the enormous circular formations were never designed to be utilitarian enclosures whatsoever, but instead emblematic or artistic manifestations on a magnificent dimensional scale, historical geoglyphs comparable to the Nazca linear patterns in Peru. From neighboring hillside elevations, the circular formations would have been observable in their complete entirety. And if their architects maintained beliefs in supernatural deities or ethereal spirits monitoring from celestial heights, the configurations could have been designed for a non-human observational audience. The deficiency of gateway entrances is one of the most perplexing characteristics. It could indicate that accessibility was regulated, or that they were never designed for human beings or domesticated animals to penetrate in the initial place. The paramount mystery of the enormous circular formations resides in their combination of dimensional magnitude, exactitude, precision, and evident deficiency of operational function. Fabricating a flawless circular shape hundreds of meters in width necessitates meticulous organizational planning and substantial labor investment, even with rudimentary stone barrier walls. For a civilization to dedicate that labor expenditure, there must have existed a compelling rationale. Yet, no explicit function has materialized. Equally captivating is their uniformity. Whether in Jordan or Syria, the circular formations distribute analogous measurements and construction methodologies, suggesting a distributed cultural genesis or extensive traditional practice, but without chronologically datable material or textual inscriptions. It's unfeasible to determine if they were fabricated at the identical temporal moment, or throughout numerous centuries. Contemporary technological innovation has rendered the circular formations easier to locate and investigate, but it hasn't resolved the enigma. In numerous respects, the more we examine them, the more inquiries emerge. Were they enormous indicators for travelers, platforms for rituals vanished to historical documentation, or emblems of a distributed ancient practice whose significance has diminished beyond recognition? For the present moment, they persist as silent perimeter outlines in the arid landscape, their stone materials weathered by centuries of atmospheric wind and solar exposure. We can cartographically map them and quantitatively measure them, but until fresh evidence materializes to illumination, the intended purpose of the enormous circular formations will remain as exposed as the territories they occupy. Located on the peripheral boundaries of Nanjing and Jiangsu Province, China, exists the Yangshan Quarry, a location that has been a geological stone resource throughout centuries. Its chronological background extends backward considerably prior to the Ming Dynasty, but it was throughout that historical period that the quarrying location became the platform for one of the most audacious architectural endeavors in imperial Chinese civilization. In the early 15th century, under the governmental authority of the Yongle Emperor, the quarrying site was selected to furnish stone material for his magnificent burial mausoleum, constituting part of the intricate Ming Shaoling architectural complex. Laborers initiated excavating directly into the mountainside terrain, forming stone blocks on a dimensional scale that overshadowed anything utilized previously in Chinese architectural construction. The endeavor wasn't merely substantial, it was completely unprecedented. The strategic plan was to manufacture monumental fragments that would constitute a towering stele of perpetual magnificence to commemorate the emperor. However, what persists presently is something entirely different, an expansive quarrying location frozen mid-endeavor with gigantic blocks still secured in position. 3 colossal stone blocks command the location, each partially excavated and abandoned in situ as though the laborers had relinquished implements one day and never came back. The most substantial of these specimens, still connected to the foundational bedrock, is calculated to possess mass around 16,000 tons, establishing it as the heaviest documented stone block ever undertaken in humanity's chronological record. To establish that in comparative perspective, it's heavier than certain contemporary naval destroyer vessels. Adjacent to it, 2 additional immense blocks rest in diverse phases of excavation, each possessing a mass of several thousand tons. Their absolute dimensional magnitude and designated utilization eliminate any uncertainty that this was designed to be a construction of staggering measurements. Historical documentation indicates these blocks were intended to constitute the colossal stele for the Yongle Emperor's burial mausoleum, a vertical monument that would have towered above the neighboring terrain, announcing the emperor's authority and hereditary legacy throughout eternity. Instead, they persist embedded in the quarrying ground. Their unrefined chiseled surfaces and angular boundaries, a soundless testament of the dimensional scale of the aspiration and the sudden termination to the labor. The location presently is a mixture of raw natural geological rock and precisely carved surfaces, generating an almost dreamlike juxtaposition between natural formation and human technological engineering. To recognize the audacity of the Yangshan endeavor, you must evaluate its engineering obstacles. The most substantial block at roughly 16,000 tons surpasses the secure lifting capability of even contemporary society's most sophisticated mechanical cranes. Transporting such a block across irregular topography without contemporary mechanical equipment is challenging to even visualize. Imagine a collective of Ming-era laborers equipped with chiseling tools, hammering implements, and splitting wedges laboring beneath the scorching solar heat. Each striking impact sends reverberation echoes ricocheting off the quarrying barriers. Advancement would have been gradual and physically draining. Every incremental measurement of stone material eliminated by manual labor. Once separated from the foundational bedrock, the blocks would necessitate being relocated several kilometers to the mausoleum construction location. That exclusively would have demanded an enormous synchronized effort, thousands of manual laborers, elaborate sledging mechanical systems, and structurally reinforced transportation roads or rail tracks of wooden support beams perpetually substituted as the blocks progressed forward incrementally. Even smaller monolithic structures like those at Baalbek in Lebanon generated discussion about ancient relocation methodologies. The Yangshan blocks render those accomplishments appear modest by analytical comparison. The logistical complexities hauling, elevation lifting, and precisely positioning such blocks would have been overwhelming, even presuming unlimited workforce availability. Whether the strategic plan was ever genuinely achievable is still subject for analytical discussion, which renders the determination to commence excavating them in the initial place all the more captivating. So, what explanation exists for why these megalithic structures were never finalized? The dominant hypothesis is straightforward. The blocks demonstrated excessive mass to relocate. It's conceivable that mathematical calculations, or the equivalent methodologies during that chronological period, were performed after labor had already initiated, exposing the nearly unfeasible challenge confronting them. Even if the blocks could somehow be displaced, elevating them into architectural positions would have been another monumental obstacle. There additionally exists the plausibility of transforming political governmental priorities. The Ming Dynasty was a chronological period of tremendous construction endeavors from the Forbidden City to portions of the Great Wall, and material resources may have been redirected elsewhere. The Yongle Emperor's governmental reign was characterized by ambitious undertakings, but it simultaneously confronted logistical constraints. Certain historians propose the endeavor was discontinued when the emperor or his architectural engineers comprehended it was not exclusively impractical, but threatened compromising the complete mausoleum strategic plan if it encountered failure. Regardless of the explanation, the labor terminated abruptly, abandoning behind one of the most dramatic, what could have been, moments in architectural chronological history. Even presently, the Yangshan quarry generates more inquiries than it provides answers. The absolute dimensional magnitude of the blocks challenges our comprehension of what was regarded achievable in the Ming historical era. Even with contemporary technological innovation, relocating them intact would be a monumental, exceptionally complex undertaking. Was the endeavor simply a circumstance of aspiration surpassing practical reality? Or did the architects possess a particular now vanished methodology for transporting such colossal stones? If so, what explanation exists for why no historical documentation of it survived? Standing at the foundational base of these incomplete giants, it's effortless to experience a sensation of overwhelming awe. They are tangible physical evidence of an endeavor that extended toward the boundaries of human technological capability and halted just short. The blocks persist in position as though awaiting someone to ultimately determine how to finalize what was initiated over 600 years historically. And perhaps that's the most captivating inquiry: could it still be accomplished presently? Extending far backward chronologically to one of the most ancient documented civilizations in Mesopotamian territory. Within this location in the historical settlements of southern Iraq, archaeological specialists uncovered a collection of artifacts that have mystified researchers throughout over 1 century. Diminutive clay sculptures possessing human bodily forms and reptilian facial characteristics. The Ubaid lizard sculptures were initially discovered in 1919 throughout excavations in southern Mesopotamian region in what is presently Iraq. These archaeological digs performed at locations such as Tel al-Ubaid or in Eridu constituted components of British-directed archaeological expeditions investigating for the most ancient developmental phases of Mesopotamian civilization. The Ubaid chronological period, now chronologically established to roughly 5000 to 4000 BCE, precedes the emergence of the Sumerian city-state formations and is regarded as one of the foundational cultural societies of the geographical territory. Excavations exposed the sculptures interred among the remnants of mud brick architectural buildings, ceremonial structural complexes, and domestic refuse stratified layers. They were frequently discovered alongside elaborately decorated pottery vessels with geometric artistic designs, agricultural implements, and additional diminutive ritualistic objects. Throughout the subsequent few decades, more specimens were retrieved as archaeological digs persisted throughout the southern Mesopotamian region, ultimately accumulating dozens of examples. The sculptures' strikingly non-human cranial heads captured researchers' focus immediately, whereas sculptures from alternative ancient cultural societies frequently portrayed feminine figures, supernatural deities, or conventional human configurations. These possessed reptilian facial features with elongated projecting muzzles, substantial almond-configured ocular organs, and smooth, almost scaled textured surfaces. Initially, archaeological specialists theorized they might symbolize divine gods or supernatural entities connected to Ubaid spiritual religion. Alternative researchers theorized they could portray genuine individuals wearing ceremonial facial masks. Regardless of the explanation, the uniformity in their architectural design indicated they weren't arbitrary artistic experimentation, but components of a distributed cultural conceptualization. The civilization that manufactured these sculptures was exceptional in its inherent characteristics. The Ubaid cultural society extended throughout substantial portions of southern Mesopotamian territory and subsequently influenced northern Mesopotamian regions and the Persian Gulf coastal areas. Its population practiced irrigated agricultural cultivation, growing barley grain and wheat crops, and maintained domesticated livestock including cattle, sheep, and goats. Settlements frequently incorporated substantial tripartite temple structures, rectangular architectural buildings partitioned into 3 parallel corridor halls, indicating systematized religious organization. They additionally manufactured distinctive painted pottery vessels with black or dark brown geometric decorative patterns on a buff-colored background. Commercial trade connections extended far downward throughout the Arabian Peninsula, demonstrated by imported merchandise and distributed cultural characteristics. The Ubaid chronological period witnessed the initial beginnings of social hierarchical stratification, larger residential houses for privileged elites, specialized artisan craft manufacturing, and centralized temple administrative governance. Yet, despite this societal complexity, the Ubaid population abandoned no textual written documentation, compelling archaeologists to reconstruct their spiritual beliefs and social organizational systems exclusively from archaeological artifacts like the lizard sculptures. The sculptures fluctuate in dimensional magnitude from a few inches to just exceeding 20 centimeters in vertical measurement and are fabricated from clay material, either thermally baked in a kiln or sun-dried. Whereas the bodily forms are unmistakably human in anatomical proportion, the cranial heads are not. The facial features are elongated with tapered protruding snouts and expansive unblinking ocular organs. Certain heads are smooth and spherically rounded. Alternative specimens have ridged formations or crests extending from brow to cranial crown. Numerous sculptures are dressed with clothing garments indicated by incised linear markings and decorative patterns. Belts, skirts, and elaborate neck ornamentation appear on certain specimens while alternative examples are unclothed. A particularly remarkable subset portrays the figure embracing an infant child. In multiple instances, the infant distributes the identical reptilian characteristics as the adult figure, suggesting at a narrative storyline or symbolic significance we no longer comprehend. The manufacturing craftsmanship spans from rudimentary and stylized to meticulously detailed, indicating they were fabricated by different artisan craftsmen or for different functional purposes, but their distributed characteristics indicate a uniform conceptualization, whether mythological entities, ancestral ethereal spirits, or costumed participants in ritualistic ceremonial occasions. The circumstance that numerous were discovered in or adjacent to domestic residential spaces generates another inquiry: were these objects household protective talismans, private devotional articles, or recreational toys imbued with symbolic significance? Without textual written clarifications, we can exclusively theorize, but the focus on manufacturing detail and recurring decorative motifs indicate they possessed important surpassing decorative ornamentation. The genuine intended purpose of the Ubaid lizard sculptures persists unresolved. Mainstream academic hypotheses lean toward religious or symbolic functional roles, potentially symbolizing deities connected to fertility, reproduction, protective safeguarding, or the natural environmental world. Reptilian creatures, particularly serpents, were occasionally connected with creation mythology, spiritual renewal, and the underworld realm in subsequent Mesopotamian mythological narratives. Therefore, the reptilian physical traits might communicate analogous symbolic meanings here. Certain academic scholars have proposed the sculptures might be connected to shamanistic spiritual practices, with the lizard resembling appearance symbolizing a metamorphic transformation or spiritual connection to animal ethereal spirits. Alternative researchers theorize they could symbolize facial masks worn in ceremonial occasions, immortalized in clay material for ritualistic or commemorative intentions. Beyond academic scholarly circles, the sculptures have generated more conjectural speculative ideas. Ancient astronaut hypothesis theorists indicate their non-human physical appearance as testimony of extraterrestrial contact interaction, while fringe alternative narratives conceptualize them as portraits of a presently vanished reptilian biological race. These analytical interpretations lack corroborating supporting evidence, but continue in popular cultural media, because the figures are so visually dissimilar to characteristic human portrayals from prehistoric chronological periods. What we definitively understand is this: they are intentional, uniform, and distinctive to the Ubaid cultural territorial sphere. Whether they constituted stylized artistic expression, mythological symbolic icons, or physical embodiment of a spiritual belief system we can no longer archaeologically reconstruct, the lizard sculptures persist as one of the most cryptic relics of the ancient Near Eastern territory. Were these sculptures simply an artistic stylistic approach, a symbolic conceptual shorthand everyone in Ubaid civilization would have comprehended? Or do they maintain the perimeter outline of mythological narratives, divine gods, or philosophical ideas that vanished extensively before textual writing emerged? Until we locate additional archaeological evidence, their smooth clay facial features will preserve their mysteries. From the diminutive but enigmatic Ubaid lizard sculptures, we transition to something on a vastly larger dimensional scale. Departing from the still submerged cairn of the Galilee Sea, our exploration travels southward, far southward, to the undulating hillside territories of southeastern Zimbabwe. Here, ascending from the terrestrial ground like the fortification barriers of a long-abandoned stronghold, stands one of Africa's paramount archaeological marvels, the Great Enclosure of Great Zimbabwe. Long recognized to indigenous populations and connected to the ancestral heritage of the Shona ethnic people, the architectural ruins of Great Zimbabwe were initially documented by external observers as early as the 16th century. Subsequently, in the late 1800s, European explorers accessed the location and composed enthusiastic narratives of an expansive stone metropolis in the interior of southern African territory. Initial analytical interpretations were obscured by colonial prejudice. Certain individuals insisted it couldn't have been fabricated by African populations. That assertion didn't withstand rigorous scholarly examination. In 1929, archaeologist Gertrude Caton Thompson directed a meticulous excavation and determined definitively that the architects were African, an evaluation corroborated by every significant investigation since. Great Zimbabwe occupies southeastern Zimbabwe in a terrain of granite hillside formations and exposed valley territories. The stone material was immediately at hand. Gigantic granite geological outcrops, or kopjes, naturally discharge sheets of stone material as they undergo weathering deterioration. That geological material became the raw supply for one of Africa's magnificent architectural accomplishments. Within this broader metropolis, distributed throughout hillsides and valley floor territories, occupies the Great Enclosure, the most substantial single ancient architectural structure south of the Saharan Desert. The great enclosure is an elliptical formation of dry stone masonry construction enclosing a spatial area with a perimeter circumference of roughly 250 meters. Its exterior barrier reaches more than 11 meters at its maximum elevation, and at the foundational base it can measure over 5 meters in thickness. No binding mortar connects the stone blocks. Structural stability originates from exactitude precision. Horizontal courses of meticulously dressed granite positioned with a marginal inward inclination angle, so the barrier leans delicately toward its gravitational center point. Interior to the great enclosure, a secondary parallel barrier curves around to generate a constricted curving walkway. Advancing through it, you're channeled along obscured turns that restrict what you can observe ahead, an architectural design that feels purposeful, as though directing ceremonial processions or regulating who could access inner spatial areas. The masonry construction isn't exclusively utilitarian. Portions of the barrier display ornamental coursing arrangements incorporating chevron and herringbone geometric patterns, demonstrating an aesthetic appreciation for architectural design as well as structural composition. The most emblematic characteristic within is the conical tower, a solid tapering stone construction approximately 9 meters in vertical measurement and roughly 5 meters across at its foundational base. It possesses no entrance doorway or interior chamber space. Its symbolic significance is contested, but its physical presence is authoritative. Around the tower and along the enclosure's interior are elevated platforms, terraced levels, and the stone foundational footings of circular dwelling huts that formerly stood here, probably constructed in Daga earthen plaster over wooden pole structural frameworks. Collectively, they communicate to a bustling, organized spatial area, ceremonial, governmental, political, residential, domestic, or some amalgamation of the three. Observing the barrier up close emphasizes the technical expertise mastery. The architects quarried stone slabs from neighboring kopjes, divided them, probably utilizing thermal heat and water quenching or iron implements, and shaped the surfaces to position tightly in horizontal courses. Even presently, after centuries of atmospheric weather and botanical plant growth, substantial portions of the barrier hold secure an unmistakable indication of meticulous engineering and extensive practice tradition. Great Zimbabwe prospered between the 11th and 15th centuries as the administrative center of a kingdom that regulated inland commercial trade routes connecting gold mineral fields and cattle. Abundant plateaus to the Indian Ocean coastal territory. From maritime ports like Sofala, merchandise moved outward throughout the Swahili coastal region and beyond, encountering commercial traders from Arabia, India, and China. Excavations in and surrounding the great enclosure and the broader archaeological location have uncovered imported goods that establish those connections explicit. Chinese Celadon ceramic porcelain, Persian glazed pottery wares, glass ornamental beads from the Indian Ocean commercial trade, and Arab metallic coins. Alongside them are indigenous local products, iron implements, copper and gold decorative ornaments, and the renowned carved soapstone avian birds. Those soapstone sculptural figures, presumably symbolic or dynastic emblematic representations, are so fundamental to the location's cultural identity that a stylized representation appears on Zimbabwe's national governmental flag presently. The nation's actual name probably originates from a Shona linguistic phrase Zimba, de Zimbabwe houses of stone material. Population demographic estimates for the metropolis fluctuate, but at its zenith peak, thousands of individuals inhabited among the hilltop architectural complexes and valley enclosure territories. Elite privileged areas were characterized by stone architectural construction. Most inhabitants resided in Daga residential houses. Metallurgical processing was performed nearby. Iron ore smelting and gold metalworking abandoned behind slag residue and ceramic crucibles, while cattle livestock, a key measurement of prosperity and social status, grazed the neighboring territories. By the mid-15th century, Great Zimbabwe's regional influence diminished. Proposed causes incorporate excessive grazing around the capital settlement, transformations in commercial trade routes toward competitive rival centers, political governmental realignments toward the Mutapa state formation to the northern direction, or simple material resource strain throughout the indigenous local environment. The stone barrier walls persisted as the population relocated onward. What precisely was the great enclosure designated for? Three principal conceptualizations dominate. First, a royal monarchical residence. The elevated barriers, regulated walkways, and symbolic conical tower indicate a spatial area reserved for the governing ruler and royal court. Second, a religious or ceremonial focal center. The processional atmospheric quality of the inner walkway, the ornamental courses, and the tower indicate public ritualistic ceremonies or initiation rites may have transpired here. Third, a combined royal ritual precinct where political governmental authority and religious ceremonial performance mutually reinforced each other. The conical tower stimulates substantial portions of the analytical debate. Certain observers perceive it as a stylized granary storage structure, an emblem of prosperity, abundance, and the monarch's function as material provider in a cattle and grain agricultural economy. Alternative observers regard it as a purely symbolic monument, a visual focal anchor for ceremonial occasions. Without textual inscriptions, the analytical argument depends on contextual framework and comparative analysis, and the enclosure permits more than one scholarly interpretation. Another inquiry: how did architects achieve this exactitude precision without textual written plans or binding mortar? The explanation probably resides in profound craft manufacturing traditions, teams of stone masonry craftsmen laboring from practical construction templates, refining horizontal courses by visual observation and customary habit, and transmitting technical methodologies downward throughout successive generations. The ornamental coursing indicates architects weren't exclusively stacking stone material. They were artistically composing with it. For an extended temporal duration, the location's historical narrative was obscured by mythological claims, Phoenicians, vanished tribes, external outsiders. Those assertions don't withstand archaeological examination. Great Zimbabwe is the manufacturing work of African architects, almost certainly Shona ancestral predecessors who harnessed indigenous local materials, regional commercial trade, and talented labor workforce to construct something distinctive for its chronological period and geographical place. And yet, a final tempting inquiry persists. Was Great Zimbabwe the paramount achievement of a well-documented tradition, or the final visible remnant of a broader architectural cultural tradition whose alternative magnificent works have vanished from historical documentation. The barrier walls don't communicate, but they establish a powerful argument that there's additional knowledge left to discover. From the towering barriers of Great Zimbabwe, we advance backward chronologically in time. Architectural constructions, so colossal that they've persisted throughout thousands of years in terrains from Ireland to Korea. Fabricated from geological stones so heavy it's challenging to conceptualize relocating them without contemporary mechanical equipment. These are the dolmen's megalithic monuments whose absolute dimensional magnitude and worldwide geographical distribution establish them as one of archaeology's most persistent enigmas. A dolmen is a category of megalithic architectural construction, typically composed of two or more vertical stones supporting a colossal horizontal slab designated as a capstone. The resulting formation appears somewhat like a table fabricated of stone material, hence the colloquial nickname stone tables, in certain geographical territories. Numerous dolmens were initially obscured by earthen material or smaller rock stones to constitute a burial mound formation, which has frequently deteriorated away throughout temporal progression, abandoning only the stone skeletal framework behind. What renders dolmens exceptionally captivating is how extensively distributed they are. They materialize throughout Europe, the Middle Eastern region, Asian territories, and even portions of the African continent. In Western European territory, dolmens are prevalent in locations like Brittany and France, Wales, and Ireland, where certain specimens chronologically date backward more than 5,000 years. In the Middle Eastern region, specimens stand in Jordan, Israel, and Syria. Farther eastward, they materialize in Korea, where thousands scatter the rural countryside, and in India's southern provincial states. Certain of the most renowned specimens incorporate the Pulnabrone dolmen in Ireland with its weathered limestone vertical uprights and a capstone possessing mass over 70 tons. The Brownshill dolmen also in Ireland, whose colossal capstone is calculated at more than 100 tons. And the Gangwa dolmens of Korea, which span from small table, resembling constructions to enormous monuments with capstones surpassing 7 meters in longitudinal measurement. The absolute dimensional magnitude of these stone materials renders their fabrication astounding. In certain instances, capstones possess mass exceeding the most substantial blocks utilized in the Egyptian pyramidal structures. Relocating and positioning them would have necessitated not exclusively tremendous workforce manpower, but additionally a sophisticated comprehension of mechanical leverage, gravitational balance, and architectural construction, especially remarkable given that most dolmens chronologically originate from the Neolithic or early Bronze Age temporal period, extensively before the innovation of the wheeled mechanism in numerous of the cultural societies that fabricated them. Dolmens characteristically comprise vertical upright stones, frequently designated orthostats, positioned firmly into the terrestrial ground to constitute a chamber enclosure. On top of these vertical uprights rests the capstone, which can possess mass anywhere from a few tons to considerably over 100. The exactitude precision needed to position such a stone so that it occupies securely on its supportive structures is remarkable, especially when the exclusively accessible implements would have been manufactured from stone material wooden timber, or skeletal bone. Archaeological specialists theorize architects probably utilized a combination of inclined ramps, wooden cylindrical rollers, mechanical levers, and raw workforce manpower to relocate the stones from their geological source to the construction location. In certain instances, stones may have been quarried indigenously locally. In alternative cases, they appear to have been transported from kilometers distant. Positioning the capstone may have incorporated constructing an earthen ramp upward to the top elevation of the uprights, sliding the stone material into position, and subsequently removing the earthen material once the architectural structure was stabilized. The most extensively acknowledged hypothesis is that dolmens operated as burial or ceremonial locations. Excavations have exposed human skeletal remains, pottery vessels, implements, and decorative ornaments in and surrounding numerous dolmens, indicating they were tombs for significant individuals or familial groups. Certain specimens may additionally have operated as communal burial locations, reopened multiple occasions to incorporate more skeletal remains. The architectural layout of dolmens fluctuates, with certain specimens constituting small chamber enclosures that could have been hermetically sealed with additional stone materials, while alternative examples are components of larger megalithic complexes. In certain geographical regions, astronomical alignments with celestial occurrences, such as the solstices, indicate they may have possessed astronomical or ritualistic significance. The deliberate selection of geographical location, frequently on hilltop elevations or in prominent positions in the terrain, reinforces the conceptualization that they were designed to be observable from a distance, functioning as enduring monuments to the individuals interred there. What persists unexplained is how so numerous extensively separated cultural societies across continental landmasses and separated by oceanic waters ultimately constructed structures so analogous in architectural design. There's no archaeological evidence of direct contact interaction between Neolithic Ireland and Bronze Age Korea. Yet both manufactured dolmens with strikingly comparable configurations and operational functions. Was this simply a circumstance of convergent developmental progression where different civilizations independently arrived at the identical solution for commemorating the deceased? Or could it suggest that older distributed traditions transmitted along migratory routes extending backward to prehistoric chronological times? The absolute engineering undertaking challenge contributes to the enigma. These were populations without metallic implements, draft domesticated animals, or wheeled transportation mechanisms in numerous instances. Yet they could quarry, transport, and precisely position stones possessing mass of dozens of tons. The organizational planning and labor coordination necessitated implies strong leadership governance and a social hierarchical structure capable of mobilizing substantial groups for a singular monumental objective. And whereas numerous dolmens were utilized as burial tombs, the symbolic and cultural significances behind them are more challenging to determine. Were they territorial markers, ceremonial gateways, or representations of mythological narratives now vanished? Until additional archaeological evidence materializes to illumination, dolmens will persist both as a testament to human creative ingenuity and a reminder that even in prehistoric chronological periods, Populations discovered methodologies to fabricate monuments that would persist throughout millennia. Which of these archaeological discoveries captured your creative imagination the most? Do you possess your individual hypothesis or theorize we overlooked a location that deserves a position on this compilation? Share your contemplations in the commentary section below. Here at Forbidden Fathoms, we'd appreciate hearing them. And if you appreciated this exploration journey through some of the planet's most mysterious ancient locations, ensure to subscribe to the Forbidden Fathoms channel. We possess plenty more forthcoming content: vanished cities, abandoned cultures, and the peculiar enduring inquiries historical documentation abandons behind. As perpetually until subsequent time, maintain your curiosity alive.